The first time pass rate is really key when you're evaluating programs because it shows how well prepared these students are when they go into the test for the first time without really knowing what to expect. And now I'm not saying this always negatively reflects on the program. It sure as heck doesn't, because people can be people and you can't force people to do things. You can tell them what to do, but you can't force them to do it. So maybe it's the student who just couldn't buckle down and study, but maybe it's not. Like, there's just no way to know exactly why a student didn't pass on the first attempt. Well, hello, future CRNA. Welcome back to CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Finnell, CRNA. And in today's episode, we are going to reveal the top 10 schools that are ranked by the U.S. News Report and kind of go over the different nuances on how to pick your CRNA programs. But before we get started, I want to make sure you're staying to the end because I have a couple big things that I want to go over. One being I have some future announcements for the podcast. And secondly, I want to go over some key factors to consider when picking your CRNA program. So again, we're going to start this episode off by kind of going over how does the U.S. News Report even rank CRNA programs? Because I think that this is really key in understanding this aspect prior to even looking at what schools they're picking. But don't worry, we're going to get into what they picked and go over the top 10 schools. And know that depending on what you Google and how you search, you may find a slight variation in what are the top ranked schools. But again, I went by the U.S. News Report ranking, and because I think that's probably the most well-known and probably the one that also I think most students put a lot of weight on when they're considering what schools to apply to. So again, but there's multiple rankings that you can find on the internet. I think just be cautious and wary on just like any internet site that, the sources are not always credible. So be cognizant of that when you're doing your CRNA school research. And let's go ahead and get into today's show. All right. So how does the U.S. News Report even rank schools? This was like a big question for me because while back when I was searching for CRNA schools, that was the least thing in my mind to think about as far as what the rankings were, if I'm being perfectly honest. And some of you may be feeling the same way. We're like, I really don't care. Like, it doesn't really matter to me how they're ranked. I just want to go into CRNA school. And as long as they're accredited, as long as their attrition rate's okay and the board passing rates are good, that's all that matters to me. So again, I want to break down that there's more than that you should actually consider when picking your CRNA programs. But I also want to try to clear the air on this U.S. News Report ranking system and why I think that that's not all you should consider if that's a big thing for you and why. So, okay, first, what do they do? How do they pick these? And what really goes into it, I think, is the key to understanding how important you should be really considering this ranking. First, they kind of blanket, the thing that kind of stands out to me is they kind of blanket categories or buckets like business, this college, the school of business or the school of nursing or the school of health sciences into buckets. And so when they're looking at rankings for programs, they're putting you in categories based on whatever college that degree is earned in, the College of Nursing, the College of Health Sciences, et cetera, et cetera. So they're putting all these other degrees in these big buckets. So they're not just specifically looking at nurse anesthesia. They're looking at anything in the health sciences category, anything in the College of Nursing category, right? So again, you have multiple degrees within that college, and they're ranking it based on that. And so keep that in mind, that I think that that's a pretty big, I think it still means you need to be more granular when you're looking at your CRNA programs and just saying that this ranking means everything, because again, they're not getting very granular on their rankings. They're kind of doing a big picture overview of the college itself. So, and what do they look for? They look at things like graduation and retention rates. That's a very big portion of what they score the colleges on, meaning how many people enter this College of Nursing or College of Health Sciences and how many of them graduate. So they put you in these big buckets and they look at what is the retention rate and graduation rate once the students are matriculated. Then they also look at undergraduate academic reputation through like a peer assessment tool kind of thing. And that's a pretty big portion of what they also rank. Another big portion of what they rank to give you this ranking is faculty resources. for the academic year, meaning such things like, what is the class size index, or what is the student to faculty ratio? What is the faculty compensation? What is the percentage of faculty with a terminal degree in their field? And then what percentage of faculty are full-time, et cetera, et cetera. So they look at all of those different components. And now schools with more funding, especially, whether that's a private school, usually it's private schools, tend to have more resources for their faculty and probably tend to get ranked higher in that category simply because the funding is better. So again, keep that in mind. And then other aspects are things like financial resources for the students, graduation rates, and performance, student selectivity such as SAT scores, ACT scores, MCATs, GREs, things like that. They're looking at what are your board passing, what are your board scores and things of that nature. What are the caliber of your students as far as their test taking scores and things like that. They also look at other smaller things such as, the graduation debt and indebtedness that the students come out of school with, social mobility and things of that nature. So those are other small categories, but the big chunk ones are, again, the graduation and retention rates, the undergraduate academic reputation through peer assessment, and then the faculty resources. Those are like the three big ones. The other ones that are smaller are things like the financial resources, graduation rate and performance, and student selectivity. So again, those are smaller categories. So just so you understand where this is coming from when they're getting ranked. I also know there are schools who don't even qualify to be ranked because they don't maybe meet certain accreditation standards. I don't know the exact requirement to be of the accreditation, but I do know it has to do with like the nationally or regionally accredited status of that college or of that university. So again, some colleges don't even qualify to be ranked. And then some schools don't even submit data, meaning like they don't even submit enough data to even be evaluated. So even if they're a good college, they don't submit enough data. And so therefore they're just kind of brushed under the rug. Like they don't matter because they didn't give us enough information. So we can't even judge them. So there are a lot of schools who, in my opinion, are good schools that are not necessarily even considered in ranking for these categories just because of those two factors alone. So again, all things to just keep in mind. So let's go ahead and get into what schools are ranked in the top 10. And then what I want to do too here is my goal with this is to kind of break down some of the nuances about these schools. And again, I'm not going to go into probably as much detail as I would hope you would go into if you're really thoroughly researching these schools. But I want to at least paint a picture and show you kind of compare and contrast, because I think for me, when you're really looking granularly at your school, you have to consider a lot of other factors other than just this ranking. Again, so I want to make sure I kind of want to show you that, like, honestly, at these schools that are ranked very high, when you look at some of these more granular aspects of the programs, they don't really seem all that different than other schools that are not ranked at all. So that's why, and I want to point out like some things that you could differentiate between the schools that would really make or break your experience versus just the name of the school. So again, and let's, and I also want to debunk that myth too, that if you get a degree from a, what is it? What would be the name? Like a high caliber school or highly ranked school means you're going to get a better job. That's just not true. But we'll go into that at the end. Okay. So number one is Rush University. This is in Chicago, Illinois. They are in the top 10 programs listed for 2023 by the U.S. News Report. And again, DNP, and, they're accredited 36-month program. They when I kind of searched this briefly, just what made them rank, what are the things they looked for? Again, whether they offered online options, things of that nature. This listed no, but again, I always would encourage you to fact check that, because a lot of schools now are offering certain types of hybrid options for certain courses. The cost per credit hour, they have listed here at $1,286, so $1,286 per credit hour. So on the, I would say, average to expensive side. Well, that's probably more the expensive side, but again, I think if you're closer to 1,700 to 1,000 is probably where the more average is. So that's a little bit on the high end. Okay. Certification exam pass rate on the first attempt. And what gets confusing when you look at certification pass rates is they'll have the first attempt and then after the fact, like what are the passing rates on the next attempt kind of thing. And usually, most of the time, schools on the second attempt always get 100%. Now, on occasion, you'll see 96% or something like that, meaning that one person just couldn't even pass on the second or third attempt. And so, again, but I think just to make things more narrow as far as when you're looking at school programs, look at the first attempt pass rate. To me, that's the most important one. Yes, people who retake a test may be able to do better because maybe they had anxiety the first time, or maybe now they have some insight on what they're going to be tested on so they can prepare better, whatever it may be. But I think the first time pass rate is really key when you're evaluating programs, because it shows how well prepared these students are when they go into the test for the first time without really knowing what to expect. And now, I'm not saying this always negatively reflects on the program. It sure as heck doesn't, because people can be people and you can't force people to do things. You can tell them what to do, but you can't force them to do it. So maybe it's the student who just couldn't buckle down and study, but maybe it's not. Like, there's just no way to know exactly why a student didn't pass on the first attempt. I've shared the story multiple times, but I had a good girlfriend. She was a rock star. She's an amazing CRNA, and she had really bad test anxiety. And so much so that she didn't pass boards by like 1 point the first time. And of course, she went on to pass after the fact. But again, it was completely heartbreaking for her because, again, she was a good student, always historically good student, a very, very rock star in clinical, but again, just this test anxiety really crippled her. So again, it wasn't a reflection on the program or her training of any kind, but again, it's kind of hard to say, oh, that school has a lower board passing rate, they must be a bad school. So don't blanket statement that kind of mentality. You have to really look at year to year the averages for the board passing rate. I would say take the 5-year average. Because again, if they have a bad year, they have a bad year. I know the pandemic put a lot of strain. All of a sudden, boom, now you're all online. So I think all schools saw a pretty significant dip in board passing rates during the season of 2020 and 2021. But things I think that I have noticed have started to pick back up in 2022, and I'm more than likely in 2023 as far as you're seeing board passing rates go back up. And again, I think it's because a lot had changed over the course of 2020 and 2021 for CRNA programs and how they structured their curriculum. So take it for what it's worth. But again, you want to look at the averages schools are producing over a period of time for the first time board passing rates, and not letting one bad year affect your decision to pick that program, knowing that there's no way to know what caused that, whether that was a student or whether that was the faculty or not faculty, but the education or the academics. Because like I said, they'll tell you till they're blue in the face what they think you should do to prepare, but it's up to you as a student to actually do the work. So again, sometimes it's just like, you can't blame the institution for the board passing rates, but at the same time, maybe they didn't stress it enough. Maybe they didn't start early enough, or whatever it may be. I'm not really sure. It's kind of hard to say, like I said. So, but I do think it's important to look at those scores because it does show a trend. It shows a trend that maybe they're strong at getting students to pass the first time. And why is that? If they're historically strong in getting first-time board passing rates, to me, that says that they historically know how to make their students buckle down and do the work. They historically know what the key concepts are. They have to really drive home to make sure they're passing the boards on the first attempt. If they historically have lower board passing rates, well, I don't know, but I guess in my mind, if I saw historically high board passing rate, it would imply they kind of had a good handle on how to A, pick their students very well for their cohorts, and B, really allow the knowledge that they're teaching to be applied in the curriculum and in clinical, so the students get the concept so they're more successful on their tests. Or maybe they offer them more support, right? Maybe they offer them more office hours where they can review old tests and things of that nature so they can understand what they missed, so they can learn from their mistakes. Whatever it may be, there's multiple reasons why that could be the case, but look at the trends. Okay, so again, I went over that their board passing rate. I don't know if I actually even said what the board passing rate was. I went on a tangent. Okay, so Rush University, the first attempt passing rate was 86%. So again, I would say that's, I don't know, I would say that's relatively average compared to like the national. I think the national average is right around 84%, 83%. So again, it's higher than the average, but I would say it's in the ballpark of being average, because high to me would be in the 90s consistently. So again, but I don't know what the previous years are. So look at the previous years and see what they are. If they're always in the 80s, well, then you know where they stand. If they have some years they get 100%, 96%, well, then you know what they probably trend on the upward trend as far as the average. They have 15 clinical sites, which is actually on the small side. But again, depending on their class sizes, which again, I don't have listed here. You want to know how large their classes. If their class size is small, like 10 students, 12 students, 15 students, well, 15 clinical sites is plenty. So schools that have more students are going to have more clinical sites, clearly. So again, 15 clinical sites is plenty. Don't get me wrong. It's not like, but I'm just saying in the big picture, I would say most schools tend to have like 25, 30, sometimes even, maybe even more than that. But it also depends on the size of the program. But the key thing is you're not rotating through all 15 clinical sites. So you're like, oh my gosh, it's a lot of sites in, just practically 2 years, because you still spend about a year doing D&P work and curriculum versus clinical. So again, you're doing all these clinical rotations in about 2 years or 28 months or so. So again, the 15 clinical sites is plenty. I want to say I rotated through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that right? So 5. I think I rotated through 5. I think that's right. So I rotated through 5 in my 28 months of rotations. And again, I would say, some students do more than that. Some students are going to different locations pretty frequently. Other students, like I had a home base that I was there for almost an entire year. So, and I did my specialty rotations where I kind of rotated different hospitals for my specialty rotations, outside of just a few additional things. But again, it just depends. And every student within the same program is going to have a different experience because you're going to have different rotations. And so just because I go to the X university and I have five of these clinical rotations, there's going to be other students at X university that has 5 different rotations that I did not go to. So, and that changes your experience, and not necessarily like it's bad or good, or, and you don't always get to pick. And, so again, sometimes you're kind of up to the mercy of, which is what you're randomly assigned for these clinical rotations. However, these are things that you want to be asking about when you're either interviewing or when you go to open houses. Things like, do I have a choice or a preference that I can select for clinical rotations? Maybe you really want to become a peds CRNA. And so having a very lengthy peds rotation and a very good one at like a level 1 trauma center is really important to you, versus being thrown at a center who does peds, but it's not truly like a peds hospital. Like that's actually where I used to work. They consider themselves a peds hospital, but they didn't just do peds. They did everything. So peds were included, and our students did peds there, but it was totally hit or miss whether they get a good peds rotation, because depending on the schedule. I mean, if that month or two that they were doing their peds rotation wasn't heavy peds cases, they just didn't get peds. And so, but my rotation in peds, it was at a pediatric only hospital where every single day for 3 months, I had nothing but peds. And so my peds rotation was incredible. But again, I've seen so much variation depending on what hospitals you go to, who claim that, yes, they're a peds hospital and they do kids, but it's just hit or miss with what gets scheduled for surgery. So know that can be the case. Same thing with like open heart. Like, even though where I used to work kind of got a dicey peds rotation for those students, they got a killer heart rotation. I mean, that was one thing, and I did the heart team there. And again, they had 3 rooms that did hearts, and every day they did 2 to 3 hearts per room. And so these students just got tons and tons of experiences. We did TAVRs, we did a lot of EP, AFib ablations, things like that. So we did a lot of cardiac cases at that center. So those students had a very, very good, thorough cardiac rotation. I had to go split my cardiac rotation when I was in school with another student, and they only had like 1 or 2 hearts maybe on the schedule for the week. And so it was kind of hit or miss whether I even got to do hearts on my heart rotation. It was it was very upsetting at the time. So this seems so unfair. So again, and other students from my program got a good heart rotation. So it really kind of just depended on the luck of the draw for that. And again, I really didn't have a choice on where I went for my heart rotation. And in fact, it was kind of a very hard rotation for our university to even secure for our students to get. So, and all universities are going to have different experiences when it comes to where they can secure your clinical rotations. So know that, and that could change mid schooling, meaning maybe they lose a clinical site or they gain a clinical site. So, and that can fluctuate just So again, while clinical sites are important, I want you to understand the kind of little nuances of it, that it may not always be in your control, that you kind of just have to do the best you can. At the end of the day, schools will always make sure you get what you need to graduate. They will make sure you get the number of cases you need in certain areas and specialties to graduate. That's ultimately at the end of the day what you have to do. Like, I had to count some of my observation days for my hearts. That's how kind of ridiculous it was, but that's what I had to do. I still went out and did an open heart team. So clearly didn't hinder me. But I remember at the time thinking, this is really a bummer because this is what I want to do. And my rotation is just terrible. Same with my OB. I knew I wanted to get more into OB, but my OB rotation was not very good. They threw me in a bunch of C-sections all day, which I had tons of spinals. I didn't need spinals. I needed epidurals, and I barely got a handful of epidurals under my belt before I graduated. And when I joined the open heart team, I was expected to do 24-hour shifts and be the sole CRNA doing the OB. And so I was like, oh my gosh. So I kind of had to learn the majority of my skills on the job as an actual CRNA, and it ended up being fine. But I do remember thinking it was a total bummer in school. But just so in case you have that experience, know that that's not the end for you, that there is hope that you can graduate and get the job of your dreams and just get on the job training as an actual CRNA. Okay. That's enough of that tangent. So their average cumulative GPA for their admission is 3.57. I would say that's pretty standard. Most CRNA programs, the average GPA for admission overall is a 3.5. Their average science GPA, they actually listed as a 3.28. So I find that interesting. Not all schools will list these types of breakdowns, but if they do, it's gold. Write it down. Like, I think this is the kind of knowledge I love to find on CRNA websites or CRNA school websites, because it really helps you understand how they evaluate their candidates, especially when in terms of GPA. I think it's great to see that they don't necessarily have such a high science GPA requirement. And if their average science GPA is a 3.28, that means some of them may be closer to a 3.0 science GPA, which, again, if that's you, if I'm speaking to you, if you know your science GPA is closer to a 3.1, 3.2, rush take their average is a 3.28. So I think that's a very good sign for you if that's the school you want to apply to. That, I'm not saying not to do additional courses to try to boost that. I think you should. But knowing that they take that as their average, I think that's a very good sign for you. So keep that in mind when you're looking at schools and trying to break down where you stand in their eyes of admissions. Knowing how they break down GPAs and what their average their cohort admissions are is really key to kind of know how much emphasis they put on that type of thing. All right, so that's really all I have on Rush, but it is listed as a number one. But again, and we're gonna go at the end of this episode, we're gonna go over what are some other things that you should really consider to evaluate schools other than these key factors. And again, keep in mind that the U.S. News Report are not going to be considering these other factors. They don't even know about the other factors. So the factors you should really be considering are completely outside of this U.S. News Report ranking, which is why I think this episode is really important to do. All right. So next one is, and again, these are all good schools, so you wouldn't be wrong. I'm not poo-pooing any of this. I'm just saying, just make sure you're considering other things. This is not the only thing that you should be considering. All right. Number 2 is the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. They are a DNAP 39 months. So a little bit different in the standard 36 months. It says they don't offer online courses, but again, I think a lot of schools do some hybrid stuff with some of their courses. So that may not mean that they don't do something, but they listed it as no. Cost right around $65,000. I've actually heard, now again, take this for a grain of salt because it could change year to year, but I know students who have gotten into the Mayo Clinic who sign on relatively early to work there afterwards and get a free ride. Yeah, and I'll say it again, they get a free ride to go to school at the Mayo Clinic if they work there afterwards. So if that's really important to you, if that's like a big, like, oh my gosh, sign me up, I'll sign my life away for that. Just maybe want to consider that. I think that's a really good perk. That's pretty unique to get a full ride to CRNA school. But before you do that, before you sign your life away, please talk to the current CRNAs who work there, job shadow one. Ask what it's like to work there. Ask about the turnover. Ask, like, what's the most senior CRNA that you work with? If they say 2 years, 3 years, red flag, just to be, because that has actually happened to me. And I wish I would have asked that before I took the job. So again, you should be asking these questions before you sign your life away, because typically when you sign contracts like that, or they're paying for you or giving you any kind of stipend, if you break that contract, ouch, they will come back at you with not only the money you owe them, but penalties, penalties, penalties. And trust me, can afford good lawyers. So you don't want to mess with that. And so again, you will be committed to working there, whether that's 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is. You will have to tough it out, even if you're miserable. So keep that in mind. And also sometimes people are like, they sign these stipends and these contracts and they don't think about, well, what if after school I want to move back to be closer to family, or maybe there's someone in their family gets sick and now they feel like they have to move. And I mean, think about those things ahead of time, not that you can predict when people are going to get sick, but you may have an idea of like, okay, their health is not the best, maybe I should think about moving back home after school. And if I sign this 5-year contract, if something does happen, I'm going to be kind of stuck, and is that something I can live with? Or what would I do if I break the contract? You should always understand what the ramifications would be if you were to break contracts. So just make sure you know that first before you sign anything, and have a lawyer look it over if you need to. Okay, enough about that. But degree, DNAP, 39 months, I said that. Relatively affordable at $65,000. That's actually a very affordable tuition cost for CRNA school. And I would say like the average nowadays is right around $100,000 is like where the standard is kind of. So anything cheaper than that, it's relatively affordable. I know that kind of sounds like really, but trust me, you can get up to $200,000 for some of these schools. Some of these schools are 150, 125. So anything from 80 to 100,000 is what I would consider the standard these days. Now it's become a DNP that did tack on some extra cost because of the extra 9 months of schooling. All right. So their first time pass rate, again, was 81%. So their 5-year average of their first time board passing rate is 80%. So again, their most recent attempt was 81%, but their 5-year average is 80%. So knowing that, if you look at the 5 years, was 84, 82, 73, 81, 81. Now 73, I think, was in 2020. So with a grain of salt, knowing they're probably more likely in the 80s range on the more normal years that you're not dealing with a pandemic. They did have that dip. And that's what I said, look into what year that occurred and kind of take that into consideration. But knowing that they're consistently in the 80s with their board passing rates. So again, that's the number 2 ranked school. And which is why I want to point it out, because, and I think Mayo Clinic's a great school. I know a lot of students who have been really happy there. But just because they're ranked by this US News report does not mean they're going to get 100% board passing rates from all these schools. You still have to be very granular and look at all the details when considering to apply to any school. So that's why I want to make sure I did this episode to point it out. All right, then you have Duke University as number 3. And again, DNP, it's a 36-month program. It says it does not offer online. This one, it says it's $2,075 per credit hour. That's expensive. That's probably getting the ballpark of getting up to $200,000 for the full tuition. So keep that in mind. You're not going to get a higher paying job if you spend more to go to CRNA school. But if it's the school of your dreams, it's in the ideal location, and you like their faculty, their students are really happy there, and you're happy with the board passing rates, happy with the clinical sites, et cetera, well, then go. Don't let money hold you back, because you will be making a lot of money as a CRNA. But if you have 2 choices and you think just because they have the prestige that you're going to spend more and then make more, that is wrong. So just make sure you're not misconstruing that. Just because you have the degree from Duke does not mean you're going to get more job offers after school. We'll cover that at the end when I go over key things to think about. What will get you job offers, no matter where you go to CRNA school at. We'll go over that. It's actually something pretty basic that you might be like, oh yeah, of course, but it's not where you got your degree. All right. Okay. Their first time board passing rate most recently was 96%. So again, that's pretty good. I would be very happy with that if that was a consistent board passing rate on the first attempt. Their minimum science GPA minimum is a 3.2 on a 4.0 scale. So their minimum, meaning not their average, their minimum. So, I mentioned before how Rush had an average science GPA of a 3.28, meaning half were below and half were above. This one's minimum science GPA requirement is a 3.2. I have seen a lot of schools make this jump when they eliminated the GRE, which again, Duke no longer requires the GRE. That has been a pretty common thing that I have seen is now they don't require the GRE. They now just have a higher science GPA requirement. So it's kind of like, I don't really know if they eliminated a kind of a nasty test that was kind of annoying and expensive to take, but they've made it now harder to even apply to their program and had a higher stipulation as far as your science GPA. They actually put how many applications they receive. They said they typically receive 125 applications yearly, although that number doubled in 2022. It doubled. So they had 250 applicants in 2022. They took 27 students, which puts their acceptance rate at 11% for that year. It fluctuates year to year. This means if they only got 125 applicants and they still took, and they also range from taking 17 students to 27 students is the most they've ever taken. So most schools, not most schools, I can't say most. I think the majority of them know they have a range of students they take. They don't just always take 25. They typically have a max number they can accept, period. And they have a kind of a benchmark low number that they have to meet in order to like get costs paid for from the university side of things, right? So they have a range. Their range is 17 to 27 students is what their cohorts have been. But it varies because if they don't have a good interview year, they just take less students. They don't just fill seats to fill seats. I know a lot of schools work this way where they just take the amount of seats that they feel would be successful. They don't just fill a seat because it's left. I think that's kind of a unique thing about CRNA school. I don't know if all graduate programs are like that. I think some programs just take a seat because it's there and they want to fill it. But if that's something that CRNA schools typically do not do, they typically just do not fill seats to fill them. They typically take less if they get less of than a stellar group that they interview and don't feel like they're going to be successful. So knowing that the average acceptance rate can fluctuate year to year, along with how many applicants they get year to year. But I also want to point that out because back in 2020, when all that happened, I actually predicted the wrong thing. I thought CRNA schools would get hardly any applicants because I figured everyone would be preoccupied with what's going on and like forget about CRNA school. And actually the opposite occurred where more applicants than ever started applying to CRNA school. I think in large part because of burnout and because they were just like, well, if now's the time to get out, right? Maybe they'd already been thinking about CRNA school, but they've been dragging their feet. And the pandemic was like, yep, it's time. Let's go. So I think that's kind of what happened. And I think that trend has continued ever since then. And I know we all know the state of nursing and healthcare, and that's unfortunate, but I think a lot of nurses are seeking ways to have a more fulfilling career. And CRNA is that for a lot of ICU nurses. So keep that in mind that CRNA school has become more competitive than ever. And I'm not saying that to deter you or worry you. I'm just trying to make you know that, or I should say, don't throw spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. Make sure you put your best foot forward the very first time so you can get honest feedback after you make a full-fledged effort to get into CRNA school. Because if you don't get in and you don't know if you really tried to your fullest, how are you really going to know if you could have gotten in? And I just think you need to make sure. And I see people do this all the time. They're like, well, I'll just wing it and see what happens. Like, just don't do that. If you really, really want this, you have to make sure you know that you're going up against people who are not going to be doing that, who are going to be taking this incredibly seriously, and they're more likely to be successful than you are. And you shouldn't, if you're not successful and you don't take it seriously, you shouldn't think, well, I guess I'm not cut out for it, because you didn't really actually put your best foot forward. And I don't know. I just think that's kind of silly when I hear people tell me that. They're like, I figured I'd wing it and apply this year just to see what happened. And if I don't get in, then I guess it's not made for me. I'm like, well, I just think that makes me question how serious you are to begin with. I know it's probably not the majority of you, especially listening to this podcast, but I hear every now and then, like on social media, and I'm like, that's kind of crazy. It's crazy talk. It's crazy talk to me.
Well, hello, future CRNA. Another daily dose of inspiration along your CRNA journey. This success story from our student starts as follows. I had my first ever interview yesterday afternoon and received a call this morning that I have been accepted into my top choice program. I'm still in shock and so excited. I didn't think this would ever be possible this year since I hadn't been able to get any interviews at the other two schools I had applied to, but I kept studying and I kept praying. The timing was perfect and it happened exactly how it was supposed to. I'm so grateful for this community, the support and encouragement from everyone. The hard work that Jenny, Richard, and Dawn have put into this has been life-changing for me. Huge thank you to Haley Frank for a wonderful mock interview back in October. 100% recommend. The 5-day interview prep was so helpful as well as all the other resources. I watched all the mock interviews as well. For those that compare yourself to others just like I did, just know that everyone has a different path. I have 3 years of CV-ICU experience, a CCRN, CSE, GRE of 302, a cumulative GPA of a 3.2. The last 60 credits, though, of GPA was a 3.7 and a science GPA of a 3.5. I really believe the interview is what pushed me to the top because I was able to answer questions precisely, show my personality and my clinical knowledge. Keep pushing forward because if I can do this, so can you. So I love this story because maybe they were having doubts about their overall GPA being closer to 3.2. But what I want to point out here is that they broke down their GPA between what was the last 60 credit hour GPA as well as the science GPA and overall. So know that your GPA is not just one number. It has multiple moving parts to it. So you have to really know them all in order to make better decisions about how to move forward. I also love the fact that, they seemed like they were facing a lot of fear and a lot of doubt whether this was going to be possible for them, but the timing just worked and they never would have experienced the success had they not tried. They applied and they got in. So for those of you who are questioning whether to wait a year, just apply and see what happens. Now, I will also caution you to make sure that you know if your school has an application limit. Some schools only allow you to apply once or twice or maybe 3 times. So make sure you know that prior to just winging it. I'm not saying to just wing it and get one in just to get it in. But I do think if you start the process of trying to apply to CRNA school and getting the feedback on how to move forward if you're not selected is really the quickest way to gain acceptance to CRNA school. So just start putting yourself out there and then take the feedback. So I hope you guys enjoyed this inspirational story. Congratulations, you know who you are, and I'm so excited for you. I'm rooting for you all the way through. Now back to the show.
All right. Attrition rate for Duke was 7%. So for 2022. And again, even with attrition rate, not all schools will list previous attrition rates. I love when they do because just like the board passing rates, when you see a trend, it kind of allows you to know, was this an outlier year? Was their attrition rate usually 0? And these are things that, again, if you go to open houses and things like that, you should be asking, I know your last attrition rate was 7%, but what has it been for the last 5 years on average? Because that way it allows you to see, was this kind of an outlier year? Is your attrition rate usually lower than that? Or is it higher than that? So I would say 7% is on the high end of average. I would say 5 to 6%, is probably on the average for most CRNA schools. Now on the high end, you're looking at 10 plus. If it's 10 plus, especially year after year, that would be concerning to me. And I think there are a few schools like that. So again, just make sure you're really assessing year after year. If they have a bad year or they have a 13, 15%, but then the next years are 2, 3, 4, 5%. Well, then in my opinion, they had an outlier year. So again, just keeping these things in mind. You will see programs who practically have 0% attrition year after year after year. Those do exist. And whether that means that they just work incredibly hard to even keep problem children in the mix is one thing, or maybe they're better pickers, or maybe they have better remediation process for students who are struggling, whatever it may be. There's usually a reason why attrition rates are low consistently. And that's something to keep in mind when you're picking your CRNA programs. All right. The next school is Villanova University. And again, DNP, 36 months, cost per credit hour, $1,300. So $102,000. So right around the average, high end of average, if you ask me. Their first time board passing rate in 2022 is 83%. Over the last 5 years, it was 85%. So you see that 83% is right around where they typically fall for their average board passing rate. So again, this is why the 5-year average is nice. And some schools list it, some schools don't. They said on average, they process 150 to 200 applications for 30 seats. So you're looking at a 15 to 20% acceptance rate, depending on how many applications. This is unique about this program, and I only know this. They don't list this on their website. I only know this because of the students who CSBA has mentored over the years have shared this with me, which I thought was a very important thing to know about this program, is that they allow you a one-time application if you don't get asked to interview. So if you apply and they don't interview you, you can't ever apply again. Yeah, I'm going to say that one more time. And again, this was back in 2020. I found this out. So this is 2023. So please don't put my foot in my mouth. To make sure you verify this when you go to an open house. Maybe this rule has changed, but in 2020, there had been a handful of students who had verified that it was kind of a harsh rule that they didn't get asked to interview and they can no longer apply. And so this is where I said, don't throw spaghetti at the wall to make sure you're putting your best foot forward, because now you've just hosed yourself for ever applying again if you didn't take it seriously the first time. So again, they have a one app and done if they don't ask you to interview. Now, if they ask you to interview and you don't get in, then yes, you can reapply. But for the students who don't even get asked to interview, they ask that you don't even reapply. So again, that's Villanova. And there's probably other universities who do that. In fact, I know there are. Usually it's not a one time, it might be one or two times, but knowing that that is something that some schools do, keep that in mind. And it usually has to do with the students who don't even get asked to interview. If you're asked to interview, you're usually open to reapplying, but the ones who don't get asked to interview, they say it's a one app and done, or maybe two times and done. Knowing that some schools have these limitations, it's really important to find that out. There's another school too that, and I did a podcast episode with Ivan on this, and it was a three interviews and you're done, meaning you get 3 attempts at an interview. And if you don't succeed at any of those interviews, you can no longer reapply. And so again, these types of rules do exist. And so, and he got in on his 3rd attempt, but can you imagine the pressure he was under to be like, oh, this is my last time ever attempting to get into the school. I mean, he was freaking out. So, and I feel bad that he was in that situation, but it's just good to know that going into even your first time, right? Okay, what else? I think that's it. Let's see, make sure I didn't miss anything on Villanova. So they say that the first year of study consists primarily of didactic content to prepare the student for integration into clinical arena. Subsequently, the didactic and clinical proportions are integrated. So integrated front loaded, what the heck does that mean? I've done a whole episode, a podcast episode on that. So you might have to dig back a little ways. It was a ways back. But I have covered the differences between integrated and front loaded. Things have definitely changed now that schools are D&P related. I would say the majority of schools are almost kind of front loaded if you were to put it in old standards, but depending on how they do their didactic work with the clinical setting makes them integrated versus front loaded. Some schools really cram in all of their didactic for the most part ahead of time. And so when you're doing your clinicals, you're not doing a lot of your didactic coursework. You've already gotten that done. While other schools try to integrate the didactic work into the clinical portion of their training. So again, depending on what you think your learning style is, I did integrated, which I think is not the most common. I think the most common that I have seen is front loaded, but I liked integrated. It was hard because sometimes you were studying one specialty while you're another specialty. Like if you're studying pediatric stuff in school, but you're in your heart rotation, you had to make sure you were then studying heart rotation stuff, even if you had never covered it in school before. I mean, that sometimes that would happen and you'd have to learn it yourself so you can make sure you're prepared for clinical. So that was really hard. But I really liked integrated mostly because I could apply what I was learning as I was learning it. It really helped it stick better as I was getting to do it in clinical. So I personally, even though I felt that was challenging, I liked the challenge because it helped me learn it more. Made it more sticky. It made the information more sticky for me. I think if I had learned it and then not had it for like 6-8 months and then had it in clinical, I feel like I'd have to relearn it anyways. I'd have to brush back up on it anyways, which you do, but I don't know. I mean, I guess since I don't know, I never had the experience of front loaded. I guess it's hard for me to say I wouldn't have liked it, but ultimately I was happy with doing the program I did. But I think that, you just have to maybe know what's the best fit for you going in. If that really matters to you. To me, I probably would have done either and would have found a way to be successful in either. But, what I ended up getting into was an integrated and it worked out just fine. All right, next, let's see, what would this be? Number, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 5 is Georgetown University, DNAP, 36 months. Total tuition is around $118,000. So on the more expensive end, their first time board passing rate was 95%. The overall attrition rate is currently 4%. So again, I think 95% is pretty good for board passing rate. And the attrition rate's pretty low. So I think that's, again, overall looking great, I think. Their average cumulative undergrad GPA of enrolled students is a 3.7. Remember, I just told you the average for most CRNA schools is 3.5. So this school has a very high standard on GPA. And some schools you will find this. Some schools you will find the average admission GPA overall is 3.7 or even higher, which indicates that they put a lot of emphasis on GPA in their determining factor of whether the student's going to be successful or not. So again, these are the little nuances you have to understand, and then know what you're coming in with. If you are a 3.7 student, well then cool, you're set. But if you have someone who's closer to 3.3, 3.2, well, maybe a school like this, I was flat out told by a program director he's like, I had so many applicants, I didn't even have to even look at applicants who had less than a 3.4. Anything less than 3.4, he just literally put in a do not apply, or non-applicable pile of applicants, because he didn't have to even look at them because he had so many that had higher than a 3.4. So that's what he went for. Because again, he puts a lot of weight on GPA. So, that sounds harsh, but I just want to let you know that there are these differences between CRNA schools, and you should understand that, because give yourself the best odds and apply to schools who have, if you have a 3.2, 3.3, apply to schools who have a lower average GPA for admissions, to give yourself a better shot at being considered for an interview. All right. So they had around 200 students apply, with 35 enrolled for the summer semester, which puts them at a 17.5 acceptance rate. The overall, the last reported acceptance rate from the COA, which looked at all the applications for CRNA schools across the country and how many seats there were in each year from 2018 to 2020. That was the last time they did a study. I'm sure they'll have one come out in 2023, but we're 3 years behind now at this point. But their data back then was an overall average acceptance rate of 15.5%. So I've seen so many false things on the internet. I have no idea where they get this information. But I've seen way higher averages, like 25, 30%. I've seen some sites where they say certain schools are like 35% chance of acceptance. I'm like, where are they getting these numbers? That's just ludicrous. I have no idea. But be careful. Fact check where you get this information. You really have to. The best source that's going to always be accurate is from your actual CRNA school website. I don't care how much you love the other website you're visiting on who they are and what they're doing, even myself included, speaking for myself included, fact check. And you have to fact check on the actual CRNA school's website. Some of this information could be incredibly outdated, but just know that the average blanket statement across the board reported by the COA back last 3 years ago now was 15.5%. And I do believe that's gone down. Considering schools have been reporting record numbers of applicants, I believe the average acceptance rate is now closer to 11, 12%. If you look at all the applicants who apply and how many seats CRNA programs have available. That being said, in the last year and the upcoming years, we're going to be opening around like 8 to 10 new programs. So woohoo. But I think we've also shut down at least 2 or 3 or 4 programs. So even though we've opened 10, we've lost like 4. So we've technically only gained like 6 new programs in the big scheme of things, but still it's a start. We got some new programs opening up across the country. So, okay. I should probably do a whole episode on that. Once some of the schools I can't reveal yet because they're still in the process of filing for accreditation and things like that. But if you live in the areas, you probably know what schools these are. So yeah, there are some new schools that are opening up. And if I am able to, I'll look into doing an episode on that, because I'm sure that would be interesting for everyone to know which schools they are. Baylor College is the next one. And again, this is in Texas, DNP, 36 months, no online. Cost of tuition is about $120,000. So on the expensive side, but expensive side. Certification exam, 91% first time pass. Overall, the past 5 years, though, they have a 96.5% of first time pass attempt. So again, even though this past cohort was 91%, their 5-year average is 96. So to me, that says that's probably what I put more weight on, is that 5-year average than just that 1 year, 91%. So again, I think that's a great number. They said they receive approximately 120 applications per year. They admit 28 students. So again, you're looking at a 23% acceptance rate on average. Again, I don't know. This is just from their website. They don't say what year they wrote this. And I do know for a fact some of these CRNA school websites are not updated very frequently, unfortunately, because I guess there's kind of a lot of rigmarole they have to go through to even update their website. Like they have, it's like, it's not their website, it's like the university's website. So it's not super easy to take the time to actually go and update these. So I don't know what year they typed the 120 applications per year, but whether that's, it would be in the last 5 years. So, but that's unfortunate. Like I said, the last data from 2018 to 2020 was 15.5%. They're saying 120 applicants. So in my best guess, they're a little bit higher than the average for the overall acceptance rate as far as the number of applicants they get. So whether that's 20% now or 23%, it's right around there. So knowing that these can fluctuate year to year is really key. Then we have Virginia Commonwealth, VCU, DNAP, 9 semesters, pretty standard, 36 months. They do offer hybrid online options. They in-state is about $78,000, so pretty good for in-state. If you're out of state, obviously, most out-of-state tuition, especially, will go up some. Not all, but keep that in mind. Even though I'm stating these tuitions, it depends on whether you're in state or out of state. Now, if you plan and you're like, I really want to be in state, you can take a resident, meaning you can pick settle down instead of traveling all over the place. You can pick where you want to go to CRNA school and then take a longstanding contract there. So I think most states are different, but I think on the average is about 12 months to 24 months is what you need to get residency in a state. So keep that in mind, that I do believe that minimum for most states is 12 months to get residency for college tuition, but you can look that up online to see what that requirement is for whatever state you're considering. Let's see what else about them. They had in 2022, they had an 81% first-time board passing rate. And they have over 55 clinical sites in the surrounding areas, even as far as Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee. So again, a lot of different variations, which again, if you're like, I want clinical sites that are just right around the hub of where I go to school, I don't want to travel a different state to go to a clinical site, well, then maybe this is not the best school for you. These are things, again, that you need to be considering. Just because VCU is a very well-known school, very high ranked, et cetera, maybe that's like a big no-go for you. So maybe this isn't the best school for you, despite the fact that, it's a very well-known school. The attrition rate for the last graduation class 2022 was 2%. So that's very low. So that's great. They also mentions that they have rural hospitals with independent practice, which I think is great. I think that's kind of like the new thing that a lot of CRNA schools are trying to get their students experience with, but it's kind of hard to come by for certain states. So I personally think you should be looking for schools that give you this opportunity to do this, even if it means you traveling far away to get the experience. I personally think like this is the way CRNAs, the career path's going. I think if you get this experience while you're in school, I think that's really going to help your career long term, to have that taste of what it would be like to work at all CRNA practice. So again, schools that are now offering that type of experience, to me, that would be a very, very high value point. So again, something to consider. Again, not all other schools that are highly ranked are offering independent clinical sites. And so again, maybe that's important to you, maybe it's not, but if it is, it doesn't matter if they're on the new US News Report. If they don't offer independent practice, maybe it means you're going to seek going to school somewhere else. All right. So that's VCU. It says there's a popular website for CRNA lookup information, whatever you want to call it. And they reported the average national first-time board passing rate is 88%. A fact check where you get your information. The only credible source to ever report the national average first-time board passing rate is the NBCRNA. NBCRNA, that's our certification. That's who our NCE is through, the NBCRNA. So if you ever want to know what the national averages for the CRNA pass, this first-time board passing rate is, go to the NBCRNA. Any other website, you have to fact check, because I don't think it's ever been as high as 88%. So I have no idea where they ever got that, unless it's like 5 decades ago. I have no idea, but I have never seen it ever be that high. I do think it fluctuates between like 80, 83, 82 to 86, maybe 84. I think the last I knew it was 84. So again, now it's the NBCRNA is reporting 83.4% in 2022. So again, maybe they weren't wrong. I'm not sure where the 88% came from. I've never known it to be that high, but maybe it was 1 year and they put it on their website and they just forgot about it. So knowing that that happens pretty routinely, make sure you're checking when things were last updated. And if a site doesn't say when it was last updated, you have to go to the source to get the updated credibility to know. So knowing that the NBCRNA reports at 83.4% for 2022, now you have an average to compare your school to. So if they were at 83%, they're right on average. If they're higher than that, they're doing above average as far as their first-time board passing rate. So comparing the national average to your school's results, in my opinion, is a really good way to kind of see, where do they fall on the spectrum. If they're below 83%, well, then they're below the national average of the first-time board passing rate. So I think that's a really important fact to take away from that, and just make sure you're fact checking what websites you're getting your information from. All right, Columbia University is the next one. DNP 36 months. Total cost is right around $120,000. So on the high end of average, their first time board passing rate in 2021 was right around 94. What did I say that? Initial 95%. I put some information here. It's kind of confusing. Per COA, third time passing. Oh, okay. I did look into, sorry, I got jumbled over what my notes were. I did put on here the COA, again, looks at different formulas on what schools maintain for their board passing rate. They have to have the initial, they have to have the board passing rate within 60 days after the failure at 95% in order to remain accredited, based on the Council of Accreditation. I'm not sure why I put that in here, but I did. But again, Columbia has a very high board passing rate. So again, you're looking at 95%, 1 year, and then we have, 85 and then 89. So again, 5-year average is 94%. So again, that shows you that they're usually on the higher end of average. If the national average is 83.4%, Columbia's 5-year average is 94%. So again, they are doing very well as far as having their cohorts pass on the first attempt. They have 44 clinical sites across 6 states. So again, probably a lot of travel involved if you are a student there going to clinical. Their attrition rate, 5-year average, is 4.8%. So again, relatively low, but it does obviously fluctuate. And again, their clinical sites vary from large urban academic medical centers to community-based hospitals to certified registered nurse anesthetist only sites. Ding, ding, ding. Again, that's to me, that's a big thing that not all these ranked schools are even offering. So I think that's really key. Knowing that schools that are not ranked on this list do also offer this experience. I think that's a really huge value point for you as a student. So keep that in mind. Then you have University of Cincinnati in Ohio. Whoop, whoop, go Bucks. DNP, 36 months. Online cost is, per semester. I was like, wow, that's expensive. $7,451 per semester. And there's typically 9 semesters in a 36-month program. So again, I'm not going to do the math. You can do the math. But I would say that's on the more expensive side, but within the realm of these other schools. Their first time board passing rate in 2022 is 96%. That's very good. They offer 19 clinical sites within 45 miles of campus. So they're obviously advertising the fact that they keep their clinical sites relatively close by, if that's important to you, instead of having to travel state to state to get your clinical sites. But also know that could also limit your experience. I mean, I do think some of these students who travel to various sites across the country are going to get a very well-rounded variation of clinical experience because they're going to see such a variation in practice. But you can still see a lot of variation in practice within your own realm of neighborhoods. So know that does exist. But again, whether you're going to get independent practice, depending on what state it is, maybe not, because again, it's harder to combine certain states to find sites like that students can rotate through. They also make sure they highlight the fact that they have 15 dedicated didactic and simulation faculty and more than 80 clinical faculty. So very high student to faculty ratio. So again, if that's important to you, and I think that's a very good quality to have, to know that there's extra support there for you as a student, having a lot of faculty there. That could be something that could, in my opinion, add a lot of value to going to the school. They also hit on the fact that they have very well ranked hospitals within their clinical realm, one of them being Cincinnati Children's, which it's one of the best in the world. It really, really is. And so it's top notch. So if you get to do a PEDS hospital rotation there, if PEDS is what you really, really want to do, having a rotation and getting to do it at Cincinnati Children's, you're going to get a phenomenal experience. So that's something also that to consider, because again, they have that in their wheelhouse. And then another thing to really consider is, do they take transfer credits? Cincinnati also talks about how they take transfer credits. That's huge. Not all schools will take transfer credits. So I think that that's something also to consider, because if you've done a lot of extra, like if you have an MSN, for example, maybe your school will take some of that work. You don't have to repeat it, which would be not only cost savings, but time, so, and anything to cut down on your workload while you're actually in the anesthesia training program would be great, right? Maybe you can work more now. Maybe you can work a few extra shifts in the beginning of your program, because now you don't have to take nursing theory again. So that's also kind of a bonus with some of these schools. They also report their attrition rate to be very low. They had some high attrition in 2019, 2021, and 2018 at 8 and 7%. However, they were zero for 3 years in a row, zero attrition rate from 2015 to 2017. So in the last few years, they've had higher attrition. But again, the pandemic, I don't know if I would really put that on the school. The fact that they had 3 years in a row of zero attrition says to me that's probably more in line, but they do have occasional spike. Like back in 2014, 2016, for some odd reason, they had 8% attrition. So it does look like on occasion they do spike, but the fact that they had 3 years in a row of zero attrition says to me they probably work well with their students to try to keep them in the program as much as possible. All right. So, and then the last one, this got kind of lengthy. I'm sorry about that, guys. All right. The last one is Northeastern University. They didn't have a lot on their website, if I'm being perfectly honest, to really like pull from. So kind of left me like with not a lot to go by, but they are about $135,000, which is on the more expensive side. Their program pass rate for their 2020, 2022 was 89%. Their reported attrition rate was 4%. So again, knowing that, again, I don't know, let's see, the attrition rate. Well, I guess they're a relatively new program. Maybe that's why. They're a relatively new program, I'm pretty sure. So again, but yeah, 89% and attrition rate 4%. So that is all I got for you for the top 10 schools that are ranked. I wanted to add a few not ranked schools just to give you some comparison items to see. So one of them would be the University of Akron, which, okay, that's my alma mater. I have to represent it. It's just where I went. I will say that some schools kind of like, they like homebred kind of people because they want them to stick around. And don't get me wrong, certain universities will take students from other states, but I found this to be common for a lot of universities where they tend to prefer students who are local because they understand that they're more than likely going to stick around and take jobs afterwards, which is what the hospital's like. Whether that's fair or not fair, I mean, but I'm not saying Akron won't take students from out of state, but they do tend to like Cleveland, Akron area, Ohio people because they know they're more likely to stay. But I do think they have been taking more and more people out of state over the last few years because they've gotten some really competitive applicants and they couldn't turn them down. So, but University of Akron, their 5-year average first-time board passing rate is 98.8%. That's incredibly high. They had 100% pass rate in 2022, 2018, and 2019. So in the last 5 years, they've had 100% board passing rate 3 different times in 5 years. So out of the 5 years, only twice did they not meet that 100% standard. So very high first-time board passing rate. Their attrition rate over the last 5 years is 0%, meaning if you get in, you graduate. Like they've consistently, even over the last decade, have had incredibly low attrition rates. There's only been a few blips of 2-3% here and there, like twice in the last decade. The rest of the years are all 0%. So incredibly low attrition rate. I think that's amazing. I think that's amazing about the program. To me, it says they're very good at picking their students. And they also, I know this to be true because I went there, they work very well with their students to make sure they're successful. If you're struggling, they hold out an open arm for you to get the help you need to be successful. So that is what I know to be true. They have 47 clinical sites, like I said, because they actually place students in different areas of Ohio. So they actually have quite a few clinical sites. I didn't live in Akron when I went there. I lived in Columbus. And so I was part of the Columbus cohort, but they had Cincinnati, they had Toledo. And of course, their biggest cohort was the Akron cohort, where they had a lot of their students placed in the Akron, Cleveland area. So a lot of clinical sites, but it's because they kind of have a dispersed, wide range of locations for students to live while they go to school in Ohio. They do take between 36 and 40 students every cohort. I'm surprised to see that number so high because I thought they're going to go down a little bit because when they became a D&P, my understanding is they might have to take less students once they became a D&P program. They interview right around 100 students. And again, I don't know how many applications they get, but all I know is I was told that they had so many that they didn't have to even look at anything less than a 3.4 to actually consider for interview. So they do get a lot of applicants. And they don't just fill seats. He will take, I think their cohorts have been as small as 32 before. I think the 40 is very large. But again, I think my cohort was the largest they'd ever done at the time. And it was like 38 or something like that. They typically didn't take cohorts that large. So, yeah, and the tuition is dirt cheap. So people want to go there. It's only $507 for an Ohio resident per credit hour. That's $47,000 for the program. That's one of the lowest you will find in the entire CRNA land. Non-residents, you add $305 to that. So puts it more at like the average cost per credit hour for CRNA school. So yeah, in-state tuition for Akron is, you can't beat it. So it's pretty awesome. So anyways, there's that. Then another other school that's not ranked is someone like South Carolina. So 100% first time board passing rate in 2021. Average attrition rate is 5%. They are about $68,000 for the entire program. So very affordable. They get about 200 applications and they take 30 students. Their acceptance rate is right around 15%. So I wanted to throw those few other schools in there, not biased or anything, but I want to throw those few other schools in there just to paint a picture that, as you can see, I don't know, part of me just feels like you got to break down what makes you want to go to a school more than just what it's ranked, because to me, you're going to find little gems that are out there that are never going to be ranked, that are very low attrition rate, very high board passing rate, very good clinical sites. And why would you not consider those schools? And so I just want to point it out there. So now on to the key factors to consider when picking your CRNA school. I'm going to go through this quickly because I know this has been a long episode. Obviously, attrition rate. We've already kind of covered that in detail. The first time board passing rate, again, we covered that in detail. Tuition, right? Because I've had students ask me, literally say, if I get a degree from X university, that might be, a very hefty tuition cost versus the University of Akron, for example. Am I less likely to get job interviews because have never heard of University of Akron, but they would have heard of this hospital because they're very prestigious. And I just am like, no, that's not how job interview, that's not how the CRNA world works. The way the CRNA world works to get a job is, how do you show up? How do you show up for your job? How reliable are you? Are you calling off all the time? Are you a team player? Trust me, the first thing any CRNA will do when someone applies for a position is say, who knows so-and-so? Raise your hand, or find someone who knows so-and-so. It's a small community. They talk. And so like our chief CRNA will come to all of us in the break room and say, hey, does anyone know so-and-so? They're applying for a job here. What do you know about them? So that matters the most, not where you got your degree. They don't care. Of course, they're going to care about your experience. If you've only ever worked at the surgery center and you're applying at a level 1 trauma center, they're going to be like, I don't know. So experience matters, like as far as what's in your wheelhouse, is your toolkit. Some places are very well equipped and able to train you no matter what your experience has been. They'll say, yeah, okay, you only have surgical center experience. Come on, we'll get you on board. We'll train you up and you'll be one of our level 1 trauma center CRNAs here within a few weeks. Other hospitals, they could be more selective where they're like, well, we really want someone with experience in peds or experience in OB or experience, or we don't take new grads or whatever it may be. It depends on the site, but experience matters. And then your work ethic matters, meaning how do you show up in your previous experience? That's what's going to matter more than where you got your degree than anything else. So don't worry about picking a school just for the name. That should not be what you do at all. I'll get into this later, but that's just the wrong way to go about it. Clinical sites and opportunities for independent practice, as I already mentioned, I think that's a very high value point. Talking to current students is why I almost said it a minute ago. Talk to current students, because I don't care how well known any school is, or if you think it's your dream school, talk to current students, and more than one, because one may be biased, right? Maybe one has had a bad go at it, but someone else had a very good experience. And knowing that the experiences could be vastly different depending on the student, you have to do your own assessment and say, is this normal or is this just them? Like, are they struggling because of something that maybe they're doing or not doing? And maybe I can ask another student to see if they have the same experience. And if they don't, then I take it with a grain of salt, right? But I would try to talk to as many students as you possibly can. from your dream CRNA school to get a better picture of what it's truly like to go there and what it's like from their experience with dealing with faculty and their clinical rotations and things of that nature. That is always going to be your best way to get like a very good experience as far as what your expectations are going to be. And don't talk to someone who went there 10 years ago. I know I talk all day about Akron. I loved it when I went there, but that was 10 years ago, or 10 years ago. So I don't know. Things have changed. Faculty has changed. So talk to current students. That's the best way. All right. Average GPA for admission. As I spoke to already, know what you're up against. If you're picking a school whose bar is at a 3.7 and you're at a 3.2, are you giving yourself the best shot? You might not be. So look at the schools and find out what their average science GPA is, what their average overall GPA is, to understand how you stack up against that. And it also paints a good picture of what you have to do to be competitive for that school. If you have a 3.3 and your school's average GPA is a 3.7, you definitely need to be taking courses. I mean, you should probably always be taking courses if you're less than a 3.4 for the most part. But if you're at a 3.4 and your average GPA for that acceptance is 3.7, I would still probably take an additional course, even though for another school, you may not have to because their average acceptance is a 3.5. So you're probably going to be in that ballpark of being okay. So finding that out is really going to allow you to know how to tackle that application process. Average class sizes. If small class sizes matter to you, if high student to faculty ratios matter to you, then make sure you're understanding what the school can offer you. If you're a very self-motivated self-learner, don't need a lot of, prefer to kind of be a loner and on your own, well, then maybe that doesn't matter to you. But if you're someone who knows you need to go to lots of office hours, who knows you need a lot of questions answered and like a lot of touch points, I would probably make sure you pick a program who has a very high student to faculty ratio so you can make sure you get that attention that you need to be successful. A remediation process. Do they have one? I mean, some schools don't. Some schools are like, if you don't follow the grade policy, you're out. No questions asked. Bye. Like they don't even work with the students. They just say, bye, you're gone. It's a one attempt and you're done kind of thing. Where other schools will really work with their students to have a remediation policy, understanding what that is, and if they even have one. I mean, that may matter to you because if you had, apples to apples to pick from a school A, B, C, and A and B had a remediation policy and C had nothing, it was very kind of cut and dry. If you don't get this, you're out. Maybe you'd feel more comfortable going to the schools that had a remediation policy, whatever it may be. Same with the grade policy. This can all vary. Some schools require, a B or better. Some schools require a B plus or better, an 86% versus an 80%. I mean, it can make a big difference in your success, especially if you know what kind of student you are. If you know you're someone who can routinely probably get 80%, I'd probably pick a school whose grade policy was such. Now, all that being said, take it for granted because they tend to make these grade policies knowing where their successful students lie when it comes to first-time board passing rates. So if it's 86%, it doesn't mean that they're harder than the school has an 80%. It maybe just means that school's caliber to achieve the 80% is a little bit harder than the school's caliber to achieve the 86%. Possibly. I don't know, but it's kind of hard to say. But either way, knowing your grade policy is really key. Or how lenient are they with getting a C one time? Is it one time and then you're out? Or do they give you a B, a C, and two Bs? Anything after that, you're out. Knowing what their grade policy is really key to kind of give you an idea of, what kind of, like if I were to pick this school over this school and this school that I have options to go to, if I, mess up one time, am I going to be out of the school? Maybe I should go to this school that gives me more of a shot, if I have a bad month or whatever it may be. Always remember when it comes to grades, speaking up early and often is key. You have to let them know you're struggling. Otherwise, they can't help you. You cannot wait till you have a bad grade to do something about it. It's too late. So if you're struggling in a subject, you have to reach out before you actually get the bad grade. Please reach out and get help early and often. Share everything. Don't be embarrassed. They're your faculty. You're paying to be there. You need to let them know all the stuff you're dealing with, whether that's total train wreck mess at home. Let them know, because if you're not showing up as yourself, they're not going to know. And they're going to, maybe say, oh, they're just not trying, but maybe you're struggling at home. They need to know that. So make sure you're being very transparent with your faculty and have them understand what it is you're dealing with, if it's something personal on the side. All right. So that kind of sums up this episode. I'm sorry it was kind of lengthy. I hope you guys enjoyed it though. And it helped explain how to pick the CRNA programs that are right for you. Okay, now on to an update for the podcast. So I know I've mentioned this in other episodes before that things are going to be changing a little bit as far as the structure. We do have some current students who are coming in doing some guest episodes, which I'm so excited about. That will be starting here very soon. Other news is I need to take a break from the podcast. So this is kind of hard for me to talk about. It's all honestly very new, but I want to be honest with you guys and up front because I don't want you to think I'm abandoning you. I will be back. For those of you who follow me on Instagram, which I highly encourage you to do, because that's where I'm going to be getting most of my updates. But we're pregnant with twins. We found out in April that we're pregnant with identical twins. They are complicated or high-risk twins because they share one placenta, which means they're high risk for a lot of different things. Some of it being like twin-to-twin transfusion, or the blood flow can be unequal, or the TAPS, which is where one develops anemia, another one has, so it's just the TAP. There's TTTS, TAPS, and then there's also restricted intrauterine growth, meaning, again, one baby has only a third of the placenta, is getting less blood flow overall and is restricted in growth because it's just not getting this much blood flow. So there's that. There's also a type of twins called monodi, which means they share one placenta, but they have two amniotic sacs. And then there's the highest risk kind of identical twins, which is that they share one placenta and they have no separating membrane, meaning they could just tangle themselves all up in a little knot, like their umbilical cords just get tangled like a knot. So going into this pregnancy, originally thought I was mono, which was the most dangerous kind. They told me, no, we see a separating membrane, you're monodi. Cool. Okay. Well, at least I don't have that to worry about. That was my, that was like a saving grace. And then recently, I found out that somehow my amniotic sac that divided the two twins ruptured. So now I have mono twins, which is back to cord entanglement, and the cord is tangled. They're still doing okay, but my one baby girl, Cora, is what I'm naming her, has an amniotic band wrapped around her left wrist, which may cut off blood flow, and she may lose that limb. So that's been a lot to swallow, but I'm grateful they're alive. But all that being said, I have to be admitted to the hospital at 24 weeks for delivery any moment. So they will be early. The furthest I will go is 32 weeks. We're looking at NICU time and things of that nature. Asking for prayers, but I'm sorry I'm getting emotional. I'm trying not to, but I wanted you guys to know what was going on because I need a break. I need a break from the podcast. If I go in at 24 weeks, that's August 24th. So it's coming up very quickly. We're at the end of June. I'm recording this episode, and I'm going to be 16 weeks tomorrow. I'm going to Cincinnati, the best children's hospital out there, to get worked up at their fetal center for TTTS, TAPS, and to figure out if there's anything we can do to save Cora's arm, or if it's not worth the risk. And, she may or may not have a functioning left arm. So that is in store. I will be posting updates for you guys on Instagram. So if you follow me there, you'll get updates. I'm sharing this openly and publicly because I really want all the prayers I can get. We have 3 little blessings already, healthy, wonderful children, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So yeah, we'll have our hands full. We were going for 4, and God bless us with 5. And regardless of what this pregnancy turns into, we're just counting our blessings, and we're incredibly grateful for even the opportunity to potentially have 2 little girls, to welcome 2 more little girls in this world. So anyhow, that's the update. Like I said, I won't be able to do any recordings when I'm in the hospital. I don't even want to try. In the meantime, I'm going to try to have the student guest episodes be the majority of what you will hear over the next several months. Depending on when we have these babies, it's looking at potentially around Halloween time. If I make it to 34, well, I don't know if I'm going to 34 weeks. It'll be like mid-October probably, when I have the babies potentially. I don't know what my life's going to be like afterwards. I have no idea. Like, I know it's funny when we decided to have 4. I'm like, well, I had number 3 when we started the business. Like, I did it before. Let's do it again. And we found we're having twins, and I'm like, oh boy, like, whoopsies. Here we go. Like, now we're on for a wild ride. And I just know the Lord wouldn't bless us with anything we couldn't handle. I believe I'm going to be back. I just don't know, again, if that's going to be in the fall or early in 2024, but I'm not leaving you. I want the podcast to continue. I know it's a great resource for you. And I will try my best to keep it going every week with student episodes. I may even share, we're doing a private faculty podcast for CSB students. I think I'm going to share tiny little blips of those episodes on occasion with you because I think they're gold. And I want you to have a piece of that. So again, and if you're a CSBA student, don't worry, you will get the whole episode. And we're going to be launching those very, very soon. We have already started recording them. I wanted to get a chunk of those already recorded prior to launching it to make sure we had kind of a buffer, because Richard Wilson is the one doing them, and he's a busy guy. He's CSBA's expert contributor. He's a huge integral part of CSBA. He's wonderful. So again, just that's an update for you guys. I'm sorry, and I just, hang in there. I'm rooting for you, even if you're not going to hear from me for a while. I'm always thinking about you and your CRNA journey, and wishing you the best of luck. And yeah, we'll be in touch on Instagram. And hopefully we'll be welcoming 2 little girls into the world very soon. But until then, we will talk to you guys later. All right. Take care, you guys. Bye.
Hey, future CRNA. As always, I appreciate you and your loyalty. Thank you so very much for tuning in this week. I'd love to hear from you, so screenshot this episode and share it to your IG stories with your biggest takeaway. Don't forget to tag me at CRNA School Prep Academy so I can personally thank you. Be sure to head over to CRNASchoolPrepAcademy.com to check out our blog and gather free resources to help you along your CRNA journey. Stay strong, and I'll see you next week.